A lot has changed within the soundbar market since the Sonos ARC was first released, so is it still relevant in 2022 and 23? Hey team, I'm Josh. I've been using the Sonos ARC for over 2 years at this point, so in this video I want to walk you through what my experience has been like and let you know whether this soundbar is going to stay as my main soundbar or get the boot. Let's get to it. When putting together the script for this video, I wanted to place myself in the shoes of someone looking to spend potentially thousands of dollars on the soundbar system and figure out what kind of questions they'd have. The main questions I want to answer are as follows. Is it worth the money? Do I need to buy the whole sound system or the standalone ARC is good enough? How does it compare to the competition? And would I buy it again? I first want to give you some context as to what my experience is with this soundbar. When the ARC was released back in June of 2020, I was working as a TV and soundbar installer for one of New Zealand's leading retail brands. That job gave me access to heaps of the best soundbars, and through that I was able to hear them in many different houses. Just thinking about it, I probably set up in the realm of 20 to 30 ARCs over that first year. Then in June of 2021, I ended up biting the bullet and getting one for myself. I was upgrading from a 3-year-old Samsung soundbar, the N650, which had virtual surround sound, but wasn't that convincing as it didn't have actual rear speakers. I just started with the ARC by itself, connected to my 2018 Samsung TV in the living room, which only had a standard HDMI ARC connection, and I also had a Sonos One in my bedroom. I always knew I'd get the sub at some point, as I really enjoy action movies and electronic music, so a few months later I was able to get the sub Gen 3, and it made a massive difference. I was happy with the dialogue and overhead sounds in my smallish room from the standalone bar, but it was really lacking in thump and low-end rumble, which the sub gave me in spades. After that, I was able to pick up a couple of Sonos One SLs with the flex-on brackets to mount them on the wall behind me. This fully transformed movies, whereas music was more immersive but not necessary for all genres. For instance, music mixed in Atmos really benefited from the rears, whereas older music, or ones that are just mixed in 2 channels, don't take as much advantage of them. Being able to choose whether to have them activated all the time or just when needed is a really nice feature. I think purchasing the sub first was the right move for me, as it really opened up the range of sound of the ARC, and even though it's a lot more expensive than a pair of ones, it made more of a difference for all forms of content. As of recording, the mini sub has just been released, which is recommended to be paired with the Beam Gen 2 array, but may be a good option for those wanting a little more bass than what the ARC can output at a cheaper price. The other option, of course, is to find a second-hand sub, Gen 2 or 3. Now I want to quickly go through the things that I enjoy about the soundbar. First would be the sleek look. It's very subjective, but I really like how it's different to any other soundbar with the curved shape and matte finish. Second is the ease of use. Getting the whole system connected together has been a breeze, and as I said earlier, I've set up a lot of these soundbars, and I think the most important thing is to have a good Wi-Fi router. I've always suggested to my customers before installing the ARC that they need to upgrade from their provider's cheap router to a mesh network, which makes all of their devices play better together. After doing this, it's been super easy to get everything connected in all corners of their house. The last 2 soundbars that I've covered have been the flagship from Samsung and LG, and both models have had dropout issues when using the soundbar. The ARC has been more reliable for me because it uses a Wi-Fi based system, and you can hardwire it to the network if that's your preference. Now, it wouldn't be a popular soundbar if the sound was terrible, and luckily it sounds amazing. You can hear my thoughts on how it compares to other soundbars in videos which I'll link to down below. But I always find myself gravitating back towards it because it has a smooth sound and represents music and movies how I think it should. I've done blind tests against the Samsung Q990B, LG S95QR, and JBL 9.1 and still prefer the Sonos ARC in most of the songs I've listened to. Movies with the sub and res sound epic. Dialogue is top notch, especially with the enhancement turned on, and I never notice myself struggling to hear what the actors are saying. Atmos content is really good when in a room with a fairly flat ceiling and once the TruePlay tuning is completed. Flat ceilings are always better for soundbars as they require a reflective surface to bounce sound back towards you. Multi-room audio is a major benefit of jumping into Sonos' ever-growing ecosystem. I mainly use it to play music around the house, but it can be useful if you're wanting to send your TV's audio to other speakers as well. The app allows you to easily select which device you want the audio to be taken from and which ones you want it sent to. The new Sonos voice assistant makes this easier to do, as you can say, "Hey Sonos, add kitchen and bedroom," and then it will group those 2 rooms with the speaker that's already playing music. If you've got a Sonos speaker, I highly recommend you try the service out, as it works really well in tandem with Alexa and Google Assistant. The S2 app is best in class. It has a clean look and is easy to navigate. I had an 80-year-old customer who struggled with technology get the hang of it after a reasonably short lesson. It could do with some more in-depth settings for those wanting to tinker, but for the majority of users, it's more than enough without being overwhelming. And finally, you can start small with just the ARC and build out the system as you go. I've had some comments on my other videos from people who don't like that Sonos charges us for each individual item compared to the other brands combining it all into one product. But the way I see it is that it's a very expensive system, and I'd much prefer to piece together the products that I want when my budget allows for it than being forced to pay one large sum up front. Personally, I think the full setup is worth it, but if you don't have the money, look into the ARC and Sub Mini combo, as you'll achieve a better low end than the standalone ARC, and it's at a cheaper price than with the Sub Gen 3. Unfortunately, it's not all sunshine and rainbows with this soundbar, so here's some reasons I think we've been let down. First would be the lack of Bluetooth support, and I would only say this really matters for those not using Apple devices, as those in the Apple ecosystem get AirPlay, which achieves the same result. To get around this for Android devices is using the in-app music services, which aren't as good as the native apps, but is a usable workaround. Second is the absence of an HDMI input. It has an HDMI output for connection to your TV, but not an HDMI input to plug a streaming device, Blu-ray player, or gaming console. If you're pairing this with a TV that doesn't have an eARC port and doesn't support Atmos pass-through, then having an HDMI input is required. You can purchase the HD Fury Arcana, which goes in between the TV and soundbar to give you an HDMI input, but that's an extra purchase and another device in your setup which isn't ideal. I've got mine set up this way as the ARC is currently connected to my 120-inch projector because it's the only way to make the setup all work and still get Atmos from the bar. If you don't care about getting Atmos and you're mainly looking at the soundbar to get better sound than what your TV can provide, then using a standard ARC connection will be just fine, and I wouldn't worry about upgrading to an eARC TV or purchasing the Arcana. You may not care about Atmos if you mainly watch cable TV, YouTube, or most TV shows, whereas if you watch a lot of movies, especially those in the action, adventure, and science fiction categories, then Atmos will be more important to you. The next potential downside is the absence of a soundbar remote and relying on your phone to change the settings of the bar. Again, this won't be an issue for everyone, but it's worth noting that some people prefer to have physical controls and don't like being forced to use their phone all the time. I don't personally have an issue with it, as I usually have my phone with me and I don't find myself needing to change the settings too often. Recently, Sonos has come under fire for changing the sound profile and has made many ARC users unhappy. I've already made a video explaining this, which you can watch here. This may not be a problem if you're watching in 2023 and beyond, but it is disappointing to see that Sonos is willing to mess around with its sound profile without giving us the option to keep the original one. As I alluded to before, TruePlay tuning is an awesome feature that really does well with tailoring the sound to your room. Unfortunately, it's only available on Apple devices, which again is another downside to those in the Android camp. My last gripe with the ARC is the lack of DTS:X support. This is something that only affects those watching movies off physical media, mainly Blu-rays, and should be supported by current soundbars in 2022. Pretty much all of the competition have DTS:X playback, and Sonos should add this with a firmware update as they already support standard DTS. So coming back to those initial questions, is it worth the money? If you're basing it purely off sound, I would say that the Samsung Q990B is pretty close and is much cheaper, but when you tack on the extras like expandability into a whole home audio system, better auto tuning, easier to get sounding good with less dropouts, and many years that Sonos will continue to expand and develop the ARC, I would say it's worth the price tag. If you're an Android user, I would probably steer you towards the Bose or Samsung, as those systems will better cater for you. The second question was the choice between the standalone ARC and the whole system. If you want the best sound, then go straight for the full bundle. But if you're not sure, then start with the ARC and then add the sub if you want more bass, and res if you watch movies with surround sound. The sub makes a huge impact on its overall sound, and I recommend it for most people. The res aren't as necessary for everyone, but I would recommend it for those into their movies. And now, would I buy it again? Simple answer is yes. The ARC gives me the sound that I'm after, and the negatives are far outweighed by the positives for the way I enjoy movies and music. So if my system was to stop working, I'd purchase it again, and yes, it's staying as my main soundbar. With that, you may be thinking that I missed one of my initial questions. Well, to give you my final thoughts on how it compares to the competition, check out this video next. Anyway, that's all from me. See you guys soon.